Fairmont Crest entered the first week of September as if pulled into an invisible pressure spiral where every boundary between stability and disorder dissolved in air heavy with calculations, grudges, and old favors that were never repaid in the proper currency. On the surface, the town still ran like a well-oiled machine, with fundraisers, committee breakfasts, and neat press items rolling out on schedule. But inside each person the tremors had accumulated long enough that any slight movement could ignite a chain reaction. At the center of that coil was Ted, who has always used the language of order, restraint, and reason to hide a steel-braided web of influence around the Dupree family and the political ecosystem that feeds Fairmont Crest. When he made an offer that looked like opportunity on the outside but carried the soft contours of a velvet trap for Leslie, he set not just a test for her swelling ambition but a challenge to the town's understanding of power. Does the gatekeeper hold the keys by extending an invitation, or by standing firm in the face of temptation so no one slips into dependency? Leslie is no longer an outsider peering past the white gates of the local elite. She carries real capital through the fundinita created in Barbara's memory and a proud stubbornness that refuses any second-place role. That money works like a new fuel line for her engine, giving her more acceleration and making her more threatening to those who have learned to protect a fragile balance by ritual and habit. So when Ted rolled a red carpet route in front of her, figures like Nicole and Eva sensed that what was being traded was not access but control, the kind that arrives smiling and then tightens one notch at a time. They weighed alliances and quiet countermeasures. A proposal that mysteriously loses momentum in committee, a grant that stalls for routine review, an audit request that slows the clock. None of that, however, binds someone like Leslie, who walks into rooms with the unnerving calm of a person comfortable naming her ambition and paying the cost for it. What makes her dangerous is not just the money but the insistence on overturning old conventions that used to pass for peace. Ted's offer revealed its double edge. If she says yes, he gains a partner wrapped in his own incentives. If she refuses, he gains the pretext to widen surveillance and weaponize every data point about her movement. In either case, he imagines himself ahead. What he underestimates is the degree of risk Leslie is willing to show the moment the door opens and the doormen lose patience. On another axis, the town was dragged into a darker space, one that has nothing to do with budgets or voting rights and everything to do with a mind that has snapped its leash. Allison had traveled far from the gentle facade that once invited trust, and Chelsea became the center of a ritual built to feed an obsession no longer governed by reason. The room of confinement turned into a sham chapel with too bright lighting and cheap decorations, a stage for an unlicensed wedding where symbols were twisted and meanings stripped to the bone. Chelsea was forced into clothes she didn't choose, steps she didn't set, and vows that meant nothing. Survival depended on breaking her feelings into pieces and protecting a small hard core inside. A private chamber where the voices of family, the echo of home, and a map back to herself stayed lit. Each minute was a negotiation with rising panic. Each act of compliance was credit extended to Allison to buy time, waiting for a tremor from the outside or for a seam in the routine to pry open. Allison, convinced that sequence creates truth, revealed the weak points of anyone who needs ceremony to maintain control. She relied on props, a script, and the illusion that the right order of steps can turn fantasy into fact. That reliance created gaps. Any minor failure, a dying battery, a sticky latch, a misaligned camera, could crack the rhythm. In the Dupree house, word of the abduction traveled like an electric draft, and Martin, who is usually placed where calm is required when others panic, found himself yanked backward by a debt shaped like a fishhook buried in the past. Joey came without noise but with the timing of a man who knows it is the most expensive commodity. He carried reminders of a rain-soaked night, of a bargain that spared Martin's life, of numbers never recorded but worth more than stamped contracts. He did not demand money in a crude way. He asked for concessions that could bend the family's orbit, looking away from a shipment that shouldn't move, easing pressure on a line of inquiry that was inching toward his lieutenants. Time narrowed as a corridor. Every hour Chelsea remained with Allison was an hour of lost confidence that the end could still be safe. Smitty rebuilt the map of old ties, knitted bits of information from sources that no one wants named, and tried to synchronize official channels that distrust each other with unofficial ones that should never exist. The net was thrown wide. Cell tower crumbs, clumsy traffic cameras at two-way stops, anonymous debit purchases of cheap microcameras, prepaid shipping of innocuous items to a service bay behind a lawnmower repair shop. The faster the hunt, the heavier each choice. One minor misstep might gift Joey influence he didn't deserve, while one hesitation might forfeit the only moment Allison would lose focus. While the tunnels beneath the town reopened for the sake of one life, the front room still had to pretend nothing was wrong. Derek kept his appointments, submitted to therapy that measured the erosion of strength 1 degree at a time, and Ashley rearranged the architecture of her days around his recovery with a discipline that invites the question of cost. She calibrated meals, breathwork, and sleep, dropped tiny, continuous units of effort into each day to help Derek climb the slick slope out of despair. Andre watched a new center of gravity form. The fragility of Derek and the compassion of Ashley pulled time and attention toward themselves, leaving him and Danny on the rim. Responsibility and friendship could cover the surface story, but beneath it the emotional collisions were real. Questions about boundaries, hairline fractures and pride, thin lines between care and entanglement, and a community always eager to read signals into every gesture. Andre rebuilt himself as a father and as a partner, losing shared time, deciding whether to contest or retreat, whether to fence the perimeter or learn a different rhythm. Into these crossing streams walked Vanessa, a cold draft through curtains that hadn't moved in a while. She brought fragments about Leslie, the Barber Fund, and tiny grains of sand that make sturdy machines seize. A one-day delay routed through an unnecessary intermediary, a meeting memo with a signature off by a few millimeters, a service receipt that quietly smuggled in an unnamed consulting fee. Nothing alone could convict, but together they placed a hand on the town's chest and forced people to notice the heartbeat. Anita, who opened a clean channel of money to honor Barbara, felt each question like a pinprick. Never enough to howl, more than enough to warn that someone may be bending Leslie's arc away from its stated purpose. Nicole saw a spark in Vanessa's timing. Not a wildfire, but the kind that can burn dry twine around old alliances. Eva registered the opportunity to press Leslie into a measured arena where blind spots reveal themselves. And Kat, ignoring Anita's caution, pushed Jacob to keep digging, not to humiliate Leslie, but to determine whether the breaks were accidents of a complex system or the early signs of a person learning to use soft power too well. Pressure built like steam in a sealed pot, and Ted chose to place the ignition point at a fundraiser engineered to prove order and decorum. He set Leslie under the lights and almost handed her the chance to define herself in front of donors, partners, and the town's doormen. She arrived with a plan that had few slogans and no shouting. Convert a portion of Barbara's fund into direct, visible projects, something that would move water through old pipelines instead of burying money under plaques. That pivot shook some of the defensive stories told about her. She appeared as a builder, not a showpiece, and Ted had to shift his stance. But the bright half of the evening masked a slow erosion on the dark half. Vanessa had tipped Nicole about a small van caught on a traffic cam near a warehouse at the exact hour a device briefly pinged through an account linked to Chelsea. Nicole let nothing pass. From a grainy still image, Smitty jumped to a purchase trail for replacement batteries, then to a cheap shipment addressed to a nameless box behind a shop. The last piece clicked just as the band dropped tempo, and Martin left the room to applause still vibrating in the air, carrying an improvised blueprint for an unsanctioned rescue. The price of that information was Joey's presence in the operation. He had a man planted along a shared smuggling corridor and wanted something for the favor. Keep one mid-level thug out of custody on a separate matter and shelter a feeder line of fabricated data for a goal unrelated to Chelsea. The choice was cruel by design because time was ragged and short. Either Martin swallowed the condition and reached the door while Allison's rhythm was broken, or he kept his hands clean and watched the gap close. Nicole treated the ice like a surgeon. A deal with Joey can always come back with teeth, But some moments change the equation where a living person outweighs every other variable. The entry was silent. No dramatic smash of locks or muzzle flashes, just a cut to a rear subpanel to drop a backup circuit into an awkward lag, and 3 minutes of visual noise for anyone staring at a screen. Allison, built on signals and ceremony, lost cadence when the lights hiccuped. Chelsea, who had prepared for exactly that kind of slip, twisted and freed one wrist with a disguised hairpin and then exploited the single sloppy knot Allison had tied when she felt safe. The door opened into a corridor that smelled like oil and cold wood. Smitty's hand pulled her into the dark. Martin held the end of the hall, a plug against pursuit. Nicole synchronized with Kat, who managed the official response just slow enough that the people who needed to leave could do so first. Seconds elongated. When a back door yawned open, the night air slapped their faces, and the hardest part began. Crossing a short distance without tripping every sensor hidden in the lives they had built out of compromises. Allison collapsed among torn lace and props, not from a blow but from rupture. Once the script died, the illusion of control disintegrated, and no one remained to believe that fake vows could recolor reality. Some of the town's atmosphere drifted back toward normal, but for Martin the open road carried a familiar question. When would Joey call again, and what would the next demand cost? While Chelsea was delivered to a quiet location for medical checks and mental decompression, a different rumor moved through the fundraiser Ted ran. Leslie had turned her good moment into proof that she wasn't anyone's puppet, which irritated people accustomed to simple narratives. Vanessa receded into shadow to watch currents shift as Leslie's name took root on meeting agendas. Anita stayed silent but padded the fund with tighter governance, protecting Barbara's memory from stories that might twist intent into indictment. Eva drifted toward a live edge with Tomas, a line where every encounter produced a small, undeniable tremor. She knows carelessness cuts both ways, that power maps punish emotion, but in a season of fragility, an honest pulse can be the only reminder that a person is not a function. Elsewhere, Derek had a better day, then a worse one like anyone in recovery. Ashley reheated meals, replaced ice packs, logged tiny fluctuations in his reactions, and each notation carried an unspoken question about what else she was spending to keep going. Andre answered with discipline and restraint, then with a message he typed and erased, then with a shirt of Danny's folded on a chair like a placeholder for the room he wanted back. Pressure did not conclude with an explosion. It ended in small sounds. Soft doors shutting, silhouettes slipping down quiet hallways, emails saved to drafts with 2 lines of notes. Dawn brought the smell of wet grass and old paint on lampposts. No one believed anymore that order could be preserved by pretending nothing had happened. Chelsea would need days before hands stopped shaking around anything that looked like a ceremonial ribbon. Martin would scan every off-hour call for Joey's name. Smitty would erase the footprints of a rescue that will later need to exist in outline. Nicole would do what she does best, balance what ought to be done with what must be done. Anita added a clause to a policy so no one could exploit its blank space. Vanessa measured how far to push before the knife cuts the hand that wields it. Ted redrew 3 knots on his map of influence. Leslie opened a new file labeled with projects rather than parties. Eva determined which drawer to keep a feeling in. Tomas stood at the polite distance that is never quite cold. Derek counted the hours of sleep unmarred by a heavy dream. Ashley answered a short message from Andre and deleted a longer one. Andre chose, for the moment, to place patience on the table where pride had been. Those quiet gestures were the aftershocks of a private storm, and in them the town understood the battlefield had shifted, not by lightning but by a braid of hairline fractures running across the floor. If a single principle defines the weak, it is this. Strong people discovered the limits of their designs when confronted by equations with no graceful solution, where one person's survival demanded a bargain with the cleanliness of a decision, where a second chance to prove value looked too much. like opportunism, where compassion could heal or be read as weakness, where a counterfeit ritual could damage a real interior life. Fairmont Crest has never been truly peaceful, but it has rarely felt this fragile, so brittle that one misplaced whisper could tilt everything into chaos. As doors shut and lights snapped off and curtains were pulled tight, each person carried a suspended choice into the next week. Ted will decide whether to keep handing out velvet paths or switch to sharp cuts to reclaim tempo. Leslie will decide whether to place money in service of projects or projects in service of money. Nicole will pick the tilt of the scale. Eva will name a feeling or shelf it. Vanessa will stop at alarm or escalate to investigation. Kat will grant Jacob more time or demand an immediate answer. Martin will tell Joey the debt is settled or accept a new charge to protect those behind him. Smitty will lock a file or prepare a new key. Derek will schedule another session or a day of rest. Ashley will ask more of herself or permit a pause. Andre will maintain disciplined silence or speak once so he does not misplace himself. Those unresolved questions are the pulse of Fairmont Crest now, and as morning returns the town turns as always, except that beneath the fresh coat of paint the cracks are widening in their own quiet way, waiting for any stray moment to blossom into a break no one can deny.